So this is for Melissa.
Yeah.
I didn't notice it until like the second or third time that you had mentioned about the rampant drug use of heroin that was happening and coming in through your court. And then you mentioned about there being alternative ways of sentences for heroin use because it's not, they're not actually they're users and not distributing. And I wanted to know if there was a difference between heroin and crack cocaine.
No. I think what we see mostly in Bristol County is heroin, and I think it's because of, and I don't know why that is, I don't know, I know that heroin is cheap. We do see crack cocaine as well, sometimes, but not as frequently. But again, dealing crack cocaine, I believe, and I'm not 100% sure because I have a case right now that is indicted for dealing crack cocaine, not using. I believe that has a mandatory minimum of 1 year in the House of Corrections. So I don't know why the difference of dealing crack cocaine would be different than dealing heroin. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that typically the drug users, what we would want to do is get them services, and whether it be alcohol included in that as well, crack cocaine, alcohol. Just the reason I think we so commonly say heroin is because in our community, that's really what we're kind of seeing run rampant.
Heroin is more common in your community?
In our communities, yes.
Okay. The second question I would have would be, does race play a factor in that situation? Because not saying that black people don't use heroin, I just know more black people that use crack cocaine than heroin. And so I wanted to ask if that would be play a factor in how you deal with your services and who gets what sentencing.
No, I mean, our communities that we have are, and I speak from out of New Bedford and Fall River, which are similar, I think, to Providence and Pawtucket. We have a large Portuguese community, we have a large Cape Verdean community, we have a huge immigrant community there. And so I think it's really sort of, I see, from what I see, the drug use seems to be pretty equal between that when we're coming into court. So, it really, one of the things that I do see is that is happening with younger people and even people who are more affluent. I actually, some of the things I got really actually upset about, recently on HBO they had a documentary that was Heroin on the Cape. And that was a big thing and everyone was watching it. And I thought, why are we talking about heroin on the Cape when heroin in New Bedford has been here for way longer and it's literally 45 minutes right down the street? And it's because I think that now people are upset that white people are on heroin. So now everyone cares about it all of a sudden. And so I think that that's something that, for me personally, is upsetting to see because I see it destroying a community literally a stone's throw away, and there weren't cameras there to discuss what's happening. So for me personally, and not any of the prosecutors that I know, it would make a difference for us. Anyway.
I was fascinated by your 10% of bad guys. Mm-hmm. And would you say that the jails are only filled with the bad guys, or would you say that, what, no, 90% in there are bad guys, or what would you say the percent of the occupants of jails in regards to that, bad guys and non-bad guys?
Well, I think it's because we have to remember that there are different jails. So we've got state prison. And I would say that anyone who's in state prison is probably a bad guy who's there, because that means they've been indicted, they've gone before a 12-person jury, they've usually committed a violent crime. The House of Corrections, I think, is a hodgepodge of several different things. And we also have like holding place. We have Ash Street, which is a jail, which is just a holding place for people awaiting trial. So no, I don't think that it's only the bad guys that are in the House of Corrections. Absolutely not. I mean, we see people who are really just sort of sad stories, just sad individuals who are in the House of Corrections, and it's upsetting to see, and it's tough, and you don't really know what the right thing to do is. But
you don't think that the state penitentiary has too many non-bad guys?
The state pen, I mean, I don't. I mean, I think that, I'm sure that there are people who are wrongfully convicted, absolutely. But I think that as far as the people that we target for indictment, I think that I don't see silly cases, dumb cases being indicted. I just don't. And a lot of it has to do with, I sometimes get frustrated because I feel like there are some really serious cases that are left in district court, very serious cases, where you have children who are being molested by their uncles, and they are being prosecuted, and they're level of what they can even be sentenced to is 2.5 years. And if you think of a child being raped by someone, and that's a 2.5-year sentence, that just doesn't make sense. But oftentimes, they look at the value of the case as to whether or not we can win it or not, if it's going to be indicted. So there's a lot of things that happen that are outside of my control, but I get your point. But I do think that the people that we target and the people that we are trying to do targeted prosecution are people who are bad guys. Yes?
So sticking with the bad guys and the children who were committed, probably most of us do somehow, at least emotionally, want to see them go to prison. But given the small amount of rehabilitative services that they're likely to actually get if they serve time, if you look not just at the safety of the victim as long as that person is put away, but the whole arc of the lives of the bad guys, is there any evidence that putting them in prison actually increases public safety?
Well, I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, I think one of the difficulty things is that, and I'll put a question to you, is that where are the services that we're talking about? Because that's what my issue is that there aren't services, and that's the difficult part of it. And so we try to find services. And like I said, with the problem with like DMH not providing services to people who are on the streets because they don't have addresses, that's just one example of these different things. And so, I know our office tries with services to create services. We have basketball clinics, and the idea is to try to get kids interested in sports young, because that will make them less likely to join a gang and rather join a team. And there are just tons of kids who come because they don't have the money to be able to join these things on their own. So it's trying to create services, but I like I said, I get your point, but I don't really know what services there are that are supposed to try to make the community safer and to have the same thing. I don't know if someone's, maybe it's safety for an individual, but not necessarily the community at large.
It seemed like some of the prosecutors that we quoted in the thing that we did are talking about a shift towards more of a stance of it's now becoming part of the prosecutor's purview to look at that, of creating services, because the jail system isn't really the solution, and a recognition of that, and a saying, okay, but then it's the catch-22 also of the funds. You have to be able to pull some of the funds out of the existing system to be able to create the services, and then, how does that work?
Exactly.
Sorry.
Oh, no. I was just going to say that I do know with Department of Youth Services, I think there's pretty much two different groups. So there's the kids that are held on bail, and they're coming in every 2 weeks, and they can potentially be let out based on the pendency of the case. But when the juveniles who are committed, they obtain services, and they're going to school, and they're getting their, they can get their GED and stuff like that through there. So that's another step where it's like, well, really, what's best when someone's in there 2 to 3 months, now they missed another year? Or, and that juvenile was talking about where the attorney asked for the judge to recommend a time period of that commitment. That juvenile actually wants to stay, and wants to stay past her commitment, past DYS, and wants to stay into June. So she began out, and she was going to get out in April, and she wants to stay, into July, okay, and to receive those services. So that's interesting to hear too, because it's kind of like, what? But Department of Youth Services is significantly different than House Corrections and State Prison. I do have to say that, so.
I have a question. You go into more detail about the OCC3 and the levels of that? Yeah, that was the first question.
Sure. So that was, and it's run through probation. So someone has to be on probation in order to be involved in this system. So that means they've already admitted to whatever it is, and they're on probation. And then there are different levels. So some of them might just be that they have to show up for drug testing, and just doing drug testing on a certain amount of days. And then there might be different times where they have to come in, and the OCC level 3, it's literally from 8 a.m. to like 5 a.m., so 5 p.m. So it's almost like a full-time job. And while they're there, they receive drug testing every single day. They receive, the job training, the life skills, getting GED things. So that's sort of like the highest of it. And then there's 3 different levels, and I wish I knew more about them, but then there's the intermediate one, but that OCC level 3, it's an all-day thing, it's every single day. And that is an alternative to being in the House of Corrections. And like I said, probably having to go every day and do this stuff and being drug tested every single day. It's a lot to ask anyone to do. I mean, you have to jump through hoops to do it. And usually it's for people who, they've been to the House of Corrections. It doesn't work. They've been in and out, and they have these drug problems, and they keep coming back in. And so it's a different alternative to try to figure out, this isn't working here, so let's try something else. And
So what about starting with that? I mean, why not start with that program?
well, we start with a lot of different things. So we start with, let's say, pretrial probation, and if you have a drug problem, then you're going to go and seek drug counseling. You're going to go to a STAR clinic, because the STAR clinic is, a place for state-run or city-run funded
option
drug
for job
clinics.
training and that kind of thing as well?
We try to. I mean, one of the problems too is that what you have to remember is that we're not social workers. I mean, that's a difficult part of it, is that we want to try to do the best thing, because, I don't work on commission. I don't get more money the more people that come in. And so we do want to make sure we shift people in the right direction. But at the end of the day, we're also not social workers, and you can't ask a DA to step into this job that is supposed to be run by the community. It's just not, so that's difficult. We're trying to, we try to figure out creative ways to make that happen, but it's not, it's a difficult position to ask me to be in that situation. So, you want me to give it a try, or you want to try?
I might try, but so I would say in the juvenile perspective, I think it's the families that they're raised in, okay, and their backgrounds, and again, it's going to be a vicious cycle there, but the people who are calling the police on the juvenile, who they can't get out of bed in the morning, usually DCF is involved. Okay, so, I mean, what does that mean? That means that there was already services in place trying to help, and now this juvenile has a potential criminal record. So, from my perspective, I see a lot of the families, it has to be the in-house and within, and I don't have the answer to that. I don't know, how you can speak to each family and individual. I think, I don't have the answer to that, but I see that a lot of it comes within, and a lot of the parents have, for that stabbing case that I spoke of, a lot of the parents were familiar to the district court and even superior court, and again, there's people who come in, they make mistakes, and juveniles, they make mistakes, and we're very aware of that, but predominantly it is families where there has been drugs in the house and previous offenses. So I don't have the answer as to really how, but I can kind of see where.
I think it's also systematic. I mean, I really think it's systematic, and and I'll tell you this, and if this is ever repeated outside the store, I will deny it and I'll kill every one of you, but I read a police report from police officers that I work with, that I have known, and you were here for this case, I think your boss had one of them, and literally the fact said, I saw a young black man with a hood, with his hood held up, so I pulled my car across and I began to watch him. And this is written, and I'm reading this are you freaking kidding me right now? Are we serious? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to, I'm agreeing with you,
Yeah.
and I don't want to pull it over, I was waiting for you to finish.
Oh, sorry, I talk a lot. I'm a lawyer, I talk a lot.
But the things that we know right now that are coming out, with Nixon saying that he couldn't make being black illegal, so he made everything around black culture illegal, so that we were targeted for a prison. And with Clinton coming out saying that the 1994 crime bill was specifically designed to put us in prison, we already know that it was saying, hey, you know what? Let's just fill up the prison with black and brown people because they don't have the money to get themselves out. So it's a systemic racism thing. It's not like white people commit less crimes.
Exactly.
It's just that who are they going after? And we are, so that's not has nothing to do with your job. You're doing your job. It's before it even happens when the police are going after again, which is why you're prosecuting more. You find more brown.
And I've had individuals. One of my, I've spoken to pro se defense because a lot of times, especially when I was in New Bedford, people couldn't afford attorneys, and I can tell you, numerous times I would have young black men say to me, these police officers are targeting me. And I would say, I know, I know, so what are we gonna do? Let's figure this out, because, and they, the shock of that someone would actually listen to you and say, oh, I actually believe you. I know that they are. And it's really upsetting because, like I said, I work with these police officers and they're the ones who bring the charges and they're the ones who write the reports. And when you see something like that, it becomes very real. And so, it's really easy to see things on the news and to hear about them and to, believe in certain causes. But when you actually see it in a police report on a case that I'm asked to prosecute now, it's a very difficult situation, and what do you do with that? So it's something that I think where it kind of goes back to that idea of where, with wanting to keep prosecutors who are good prosecutors, who are there for the right reasons, because not all of them are there for the right reasons. I know that. I'm not rose-colored. I know that there are some people who are, even with my own office, who I would prefer not to, work with, let alone know at all. So, it is about trying to get, people who are good people who understand that there is systematic racism. And it's hard to keep them, and it's hard, it really is.
I'm wondering, sort of a broader question, like understanding that there's systematic racism means understanding that people are put in situations where they're more likely to make a mistake and be in that place, right? There are huge disparities in housing and healthcare and education, and black and brown bodies are put in places where they're able to be killed and hurt at hugely disproportionate numbers. So knowing that all of that is happening in society, how does that change how you do your job, which is a small part of that? And I think the criminal justice system is a system that's being analyzed a lot right now, but it's complicit in all these other structures of society, and that's a huge thing. And I'm wondering how you do your job knowing that happens, and knowing that you're working within that system.
When there's something as blatant as the one I talked about, that's an easy answer. That's a different one. But when you just have your regular day-to-day stuff, and that doesn't happen that often, those ones where you just know, okay, here it is, this is a racist thing that's going, or a police officer, It's more difficult when it's just your everyday thing. And, I've been doing it for 9 years, and I will say that I think that when new prosecutors, the same with new public defenders, whenever they come in, everyone is like guns a-blazing, police officers are all telling the truth and everyone needs to go to jail, or police officers are all liars, and everyone kind of that new, I can only speak for myself, and I really try to just look at each case individually and do the right thing. That's always what I always say, no matter what, I'm going to try to do the right thing. And oftentimes it's really talking to people, and it's really listening and trying to figure out, and I don't know if I always do the right thing. I always try to. We have equally as crazy victims. I have a victim who thinks that her pocketbook being stolen is equivalent to her being raped, and it's like, okay, we have to kind of go down here. I'm not going to, your debit card was stolen. I'm not going to send someone to jail because they went to Dunkin' Donuts on your debit card. So there's equally, and often where we are, our victims become our defendants. The next day in our lower income areas like New Bedford, one day someone's a defendant, the next day they're a victim, and so. But I think again, my original statement of knowing your community and being involved in your community is the part that makes you more sensitive to some of those issues.
Given the desires that you've spoken of to treat each case individually and so forth, how does that pile of cases affect your ability to do that?
It's hard. Dave, I know is now, he probably doesn't want me to announce it, but it's also prosecuting cases instead of...
It's much like traffic tickets.
But that you have a long line of defense attorneys that are all there, and they all want their stuff to be heard, and they want to tell, and literally I get to court at 8:30 in the morning, and the judge comes out by 9 o'clock, and they want you to have answers right there, and everyone's there, and it's a rush. And it is... and that's where I think things fall through the cracks, and it's, that's our level. And I think that the Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers says that an attorney, and you can help me with this one, I think an attorney should cover maybe 400 cases, a year, by their own. And I would say that every DA, depending on what court, has between 12 and 1,800 cases a year, which is so much more than that. So there's really only some cases that you can really focus on and really do. So I will say that I think it swings both ways, because I think sometimes, a lot of times, I'm like, yeah, just take this, whatever the defense attorney is saying, and I'll sign it, and here you go, and and try to get it done. But it does, that pile it's sort of the bane of my existence. It's every day, it's on my feet, it's in court, and that's every single day. There's never a day unless there's like some bizarre judges conference that we don't have that.
And the charges range from operating with a suspended license, which would just be, someone summoned to court because they had an invalid license. And we see a lot of those, we'll dismiss those, and we'll dismiss them, maybe $100 court cost, depending on what court you're in. And so we have a lot of those. So it's all ranges in a certain pile, and certain, to get deeper, and it's not just, an offer or trial, there's evidence we need to provide, and certain days, you prepare the case, you're presenting what's called discovery to defense counsel, and then they can come in, but, also our offices, we have different defense attorneys' phone numbers on hand. I've given my phone number out, and, they want to know and see if they can, before the next date, set up maybe a plea or see a resolution to that too. So that's helpful. Not all prosecutors are like that, but I think, what's in the best interest of everyone here and everyone's time, and, like Melissa said, each file is a person. So that's how I take it, and I know Melissa takes it that way too.
I wanted to just ask something, because we work with kids in DYS. We do arts programming with them, theater and dance and writing and stuff. And we work with some of the kids who are, the most violent or that have the highest convictions. But we see a totally different side of them. You know what I mean? We don't really know. And I know there are victims and everything, but it's also, we know the cycle of it. We know that they were victims themselves most likely. So when we talk about bad guys, it's sort of like, it bothers me because it's sort of like perpetuating that cycle instead of recognizing that everybody is a human being, and even if they did something bad, that doesn't define actually who they are and what their potential is, and also what might be best for society to do with them.
I just want to piggyback off that. I feel like we talk a lot about sexual offenders or whatever. That's the one thing that everybody is like, oh, lock them up. Lock those people up, right? But I listened to this podcast that opened my eyes, and it was like this woman who was trying to get funding to try to figure out, rape is like a huge problem. No one wants to talk about it, But it's like, if you're not even willing to talk about it or raise money to try to figure out how do we freaking bring down the number of rapes and molestations that goes on, you're not really trying to fix a problem. You're just trying to throw everyone that's raping people in jail.
But again, it kind of goes back to that same idea that I'm not a social worker. That's not...
No, this is not an attack on you. This is just a bigger thing of if people don't... this woman was... And there were other young kids on the podcast where it was their parent had realized that they were... Not that they had molested someone, but read a diary, whatever, realized that they had this problem. And there was no... they went to a therapist. The therapist was I don't even want to see this person. I don't want to touch on this. You know what I mean? So if no one... So that's just one thing to me that opened my eyes to wow, there has to be more of a conversation and more of people coming together.
In Massachusetts, we have mandatory minimums on people who drive drunk, and I will say that I think that drunk driving probably touches more people in the community than gang violence or any other violence, because these are just people driving home from work. Massachusetts has mandatory minimums on these things, and someone can go to jail for drunk driving, which doesn't, we talk about drugs and guns and violent crimes, I think that an OUI fifth offense is a 5-year mandatory minimum in state prison, and so you deal with not just people who are victims of violent crimes like that, but you have someone who was smashed by a person who was driving drunk, and it's their multiple offense, and they can no longer walk, or they're dead. We have motor vehicle, so there's such a wide variety of the crimes that we see that it's hard to sort of come up with one simple solution to try to figure out all these, the different things.
I was hoping both of you could explain to people here how the system is built on speed and how many cases go to trial. If you could kind of break down maybe the number of DAs in Attleboro, how many cases you have, how many cases go to trial, and how many are kind of
Speed is the interesting thing, because from Boston, the judges have now come up with these metrics that cases have to be tried the idea is to have it tried within 1 year of the time that they've been arraigned, no matter what the charge is. It can be the simplest case, it can be a multiple count rape, it can be a multiple count gun charge, no matter what. They want it done within this period of time, which, you know, I would say is negative for both sides, because I think that, you know, oftentimes, and I would see Dave, and they're like, no, I have an investigator out trying to do this, and the judge will be giving him the worst time because, well, your case is past, you know, past this certain amount of time period. It's on our, what do they always say? It's their,
Time track.
huh?
It's like a time track case.
Yeah, special time standards. That's what they say. Special time standards case. Yours is a special time, so you need to finish whatever you're doing and get into the trial session. And that's really scary when you think that what, you know, recommending someone to go to jail or trying a case where you're looking for a jail time or fighting against jail time, that's a really important thing, you know, and I think, you know, a lot of prosecutors can recommend jail time and not realize, like, that should mean something. If you're looking for jail time, it should be something that means something, and you shouldn't just be willy-nilly, oh, 6 months here and that, because what we're talking about is taking someone's liberty and having them put away. And so this idea of that we have to have these timetables, I'm sort of against. That being said, also sometimes cases can languish for years, and a defendant does have the right to have their case be tried. But I would say on average we have probably 10 to 15 trials on every single day in any court, in all 4 courts. Usually it's about 10 to 15. We have 2 prosecutors in there handling all of those cases. And probably, I would say, on any given day, any given week, probably 3 to 5 trials go, I would say, in each court. And that's usually either a jury or a bench. So you come in the morning and you have, and that's a smaller pile, but you have a pile of 15 cases that within an hour you could be impaneling a jury and be ready to go. So it's a very, very hectic time period. I've tried cases where I haven't even read a police report, and like, all right, let's go. Let's, you know, we'll see what it is. And usually those are drunk driving cases, and those are usually the same. But luckily, so we have 4 prosecutors in Attleboro, which is, we usually, you know, I wish I had more numbers. New Bedford is a very